Margaret woke up every day at 6 in the morning, a habit she had maintained for over 3 decades. At 58 years old, she continued following the same routine she had started when she lost her husband, Robert, in a fatal accident when their son David was only 3 years old. "David, breakfast is on the table," she called toward his room, repeating the usual ritual. But this time a voice that wasn't her son's responded from upstairs. "Mrs. Wilson, David doesn't eat breakfast here anymore. We bought an imported coffee maker from Italy." Margaret felt a tightness in her heart. Jessica, the daughter-in-law who had arrived 6 months ago, never treated her as a mother-in-law. Always Mrs. Wilson, as if she were a distant acquaintance, not the woman who had raised her husband alone with so much sacrifice. "Good morning, Mom." David came downstairs wearing an elegant suit that Margaret had never seen before. "Jessica is right. We need to change some things around here." "Change what?" Margaret didn't understand. "Son, is there something wrong with our usual breakfast?" "There's nothing wrong, Mom. It's just that things need to evolve." David looked away as he grabbed a small cup from the expensive machine that had recently appeared in the kitchen. Margaret watched this son she had raised while selling meal prep boxes, sewing clothes for others, working as a cleaning lady to pay for his college education. "David," she said gently, "remember when you dreamed of opening your own company and said I would be your first employee?" "Mom, that was when I was a kid. People evolve." "Of course they evolve." Jessica entered the kitchen wearing a very expensive silk robe, worth more than Margaret's entire monthly salary as a saleswoman. "David now has obligations as a married man. He can't continue living just thinking about his mother." Margaret tried to smile, but Jessica's words were like blades. "Jessica, dear, I only wish the best for you both." "I understand, Mrs. Wilson, but the best sometimes requires changes." "What kind of changes?" David moved uncomfortably, but it was Jessica who spoke with an artificial smile. "This house is too small for 3 adults, don't you agree?" "But this has always been our home," Margaret said, feeling the floor disappear beneath her. "Your father and I bought it when David was born." "Mom," David finally responded, but his voice sounded altered, distant. "The house has been registered in my name for 5 years. Remember we transferred it when I graduated?" Margaret remembered. David had explained it was for tax reasons, that it would be advantageous for everyone. She had trusted completely and signed all the paperwork. "David, are you suggesting that?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Mom. I'm being clear." He straightened his posture, and Margaret noticed Jessica smiling satisfied in the background. "Jessica and I need our space, our privacy. But I'm your mother. I raised you alone after your father's death." "I'm grateful for everything," David said, but without any emotion. "But now I have a wife. My priority has changed." Jessica approached David and linked her arm through his in a possessive demonstration that made Margaret nauseous. "Mrs. Wilson, don't take it personally. It's just that women from your generation have very different concepts about family. David needs to build something new." "Different concepts?" Margaret felt her voice fail. "What concepts?" "Of love, dedication, sacrifice. Of dependency." Jessica responded coldly. "David told me how you always did absolutely everything for him. That's not healthy for an adult man." Margaret stared at her son, hoping he would defend his upbringing, that he would value all the sacrifices made. But David just lowered his head and drank his Italian coffee. "Mom," he said finally, unable to look at her, "you're going to have to find another place to live." Margaret's world collapsed in that instant. 3.5 decades of complete dedication, of giving up everything for that boy, had resulted in this. Being expelled from her own home by her son. "David," she whispered, "you can't be serious." "I am," he confirmed, and for the first time looked at her directly. But in those eyes she had watched grow from child to adult man, Margaret no longer recognized the son she had raised. The news spread through the house like invisible poison. Margaret spent the following days in a state of shock, trying to process her son's words. Maybe it was just a moment of pressure, she thought. Maybe David would reconsider when he realized the absurdity of his decision. But on Thursday morning, Jessica came downstairs carrying a suitcase. "Mrs. Wilson, I brought this for you to start packing your belongings." Margaret was washing the breakfast dishes, a habit maintained for decades, when she saw the suitcase being placed on the kitchen floor as if it were a disposable object. "Jessica, I need to talk to my son. David already talked to me about it. The decision has been made." Jessica opened the suitcase and began removing some of Margaret's old clothes from the line. "You have until Sunday to get ready." "Sunday?" That's only 3 days. More than enough time. You don't have many belongings anyway. Jessica's indifference was piercing. Margaret felt tears burning in her eyes, but refused to show weakness before her daughter-in-law. I want to speak with David immediately. He's at work. Then I'll wait for his return. Jessica sighed impatiently. Mrs. Wilson, I'm going to be quite direct with you. David had to choose between me and you. He chose his wife. Period. How can you be so insensitive? I'm his mother. And I'm his woman, and I can offer things you never could. Jessica placed her hand on her belly in an obvious suggestion. Children, a future, a real family. Margaret felt as if a cold knife had pierced her heart. A real family. David and I have been family for 3.5 decades. Were. Now he has an adult family. At that moment, David entered through the door earlier than usual. Margaret ran to him. David, my son, explain to me what's happening. This woman is treating me like I'm a stranger. David looked at Jessica, who made a disapproving expression, and then at his mother. Mom, we already discussed this. The decision is made. What decision? You're going to throw me out like some animal. Nobody's throwing anyone out. I'm offering you a better alternative. David went to the living room, followed by both women. From a file folder, he pulled out a deed. Remember the ranch Dad left, that one in Blue Lake? Margaret remembered. It was a 12-acre plot in the countryside, 2 hours away, that Robert had inherited from his grandfather. They had never done anything with it because it was too remote and had no basic infrastructure. David, that place doesn't even have electricity, doesn't have running water. It has a well, and you can install power. With what money? You know I only earn minimum wage. Mom, you always said you wanted peace and quiet. There you'll have it. Margaret looked incredulously at her son. David, I'm 58 years old. How am I going to live alone in the middle of nowhere? You'll adjust. Jessica interfered. Country people are tougher anyway. Country people? Margaret turned to her daughter-in-law. I'm not from the country. I was born and raised here in the city. But you have country ways, Jessica said with disdain. Those habits of making traditional coffee, hanging clothes on the line, talking to neighbors. David remained silent while his wife verbally destroyed his mother. David, Margaret pleaded, are you going to allow her to talk to me like this? I'm your mother. Jessica is my wife, David responded automatically. And she's right. You need to have your autonomy. Autonomy at 58, alone, without resources, on an abandoned ranch. At that moment, the neighbor Mrs. Carmen knocked on the door. She was one of the few friends Margaret had. Margaret, I came to check if everything's okay. I heard some strange comments around the neighborhood. Jessica went to open the door with a forced smile. Hello, Mrs. Carmen. Good thing you showed up. We wanted to share our good news. What good news? Mrs. Wilson is going to move to a wonderful ranch in the countryside, a renewed life more peaceful. Mrs. Carmen looked at Margaret, who was visibly devastated, and immediately understood the situation. Margaret dear, is this real? Margaret couldn't speak. Tears finally began to fall. It's true, Jessica continued animatedly. David thought it would be better for her to have her own space, right, David? Yeah, David mumbled, unable to look at Mrs. Carmen. I see, Mrs. Carmen said, her voice loaded with disappointment. Well, Margaret, if you need anything. She won't need anything, Jessica cut in. It'll be a new phase in her life. When Mrs. Carmen left, clearly shocked by what she had witnessed, Jessica turned to Margaret. There, now even the neighbors know. There's no turning back. Margaret looked at David one last time, searching for some trace of the loving son she had raised. David, is this really what you want? To see me leave? David hesitated for an instant, but Jessica approached him and whispered something in his ear. Mom, he said finally, on Sunday I'll take you to the ranch. The ultimatum was established. Margaret Wilson had 3 days to accept that the son for whom she had sacrificed her entire existence was discarding her like trash. But what Margaret didn't imagine at that moment was that the abandoned ranch held a secret that her late husband had never revealed. A secret that would transform not only her life, but would make David deeply regret the cruelest decision he had ever made. Sunday arrived like a sentence. Margaret had spent the last 3 days in a fog of disbelief, organizing her few belongings in a suitcase that seemed to mock the entire life she was abandoning. David showed up at 9 in the morning driving a borrowed vehicle she had never seen. Ready, Mom? The question sounded too casual for the most devastating moment of Margaret's life. She looked one last time at the house where she had raised David, where every corner held memories of sacrifice and unconditional love. David, are you sure about this? Can't we talk one more time? Mom, we've already decided. It'll be better for everyone. Jessica appeared at the door still in her robe with a barely disguised victorious smile. Mrs. Wilson, have a good trip. When you get settled there, let us know. The hypocrisy of those words was like salt on an open wound. Margaret got in the vehicle without looking back, carrying only a suitcase of clothes, some old photographs, and $300 she had managed to save in recent months. During the 2-hour drive, the silence was deafening. David drove with his eyes fixed on the road, avoiding any conversation. Margaret looked out the window, watching the city she had known since childhood gradually transform into thick vegetation and dirt roads. David, she tried one last time. What if I can't survive there? What if something happens to me? You'll manage, Mom. You've always been resilient. Resilient for you, David. Everything I did was for you. He didn't reply. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Margaret felt her heart sink. The property Robert had left was much worse than she remembered. The metal gate was rusted and fallen. Vegetation had invaded everything, reaching waist height. The wooden house, which had once been white, was now gray and peeling, with several loose boards and broken windows. My God, Margaret murmured, getting out of the vehicle. David opened the trunk and removed her suitcase, placing it on the ground without ceremony. The key is under that rock there. He pointed. The well is out back. There's a manual pump that still works. Margaret walked to the house as if in a nightmare. The door creaked open, revealing an interior covered in dust, spider webs, and old furniture covered with moldy sheets. The smell of dampness and abandonment was suffocating. David, this isn't livable. You can fix it up, clean, organize. With what energy? With what money? David took $200 from his pocket and placed it on an old table. This should help for now. $200, David? That won't last even 2 weeks. It's what I can do right now. Margaret looked around that abandoned house and felt she was being buried alive. There was no phone signal. The electricity had been cut off years ago, and the nearest town was 10 miles away. Son, she said, her voice breaking, you're condemning me to death. David avoided his mother's gaze. That's an exaggeration, Mom. You just need to adjust. What if I get sick? What if I need help? There are some neighbors a few miles from here. A few miles? David, I don't even have a vehicle. You can ask for a ride to town when you need it. David's coldness was terrifying. Margaret no longer recognized anything of the son she had raised with so much love. Well, Mom, I need to get back. Jessica is waiting for me for lunch. You're leaving now? Just like that? There's nothing to do here. David walked toward the vehicle, leaving Margaret standing at the door of the ruined house. She ran after him. David, David, for God's sake. He stopped with his hand on the vehicle door. What, Mom? Give me a hug. At least that. David hesitated, looked at the mother who had sacrificed everything for him, and said coldly, Bye, Mom. Take care. He got in the vehicle and drove off, raising a cloud of dust that completely covered Margaret. When the sound of the engine disappeared in the distance, absolute silence took over the place. Margaret was alone as she had never been in her entire life. At 58 years old, without money, without support, in a ruined house in the middle of nowhere, she sat on the rotting porch steps and cried as she had never cried before. She cried for her son's ingratitude, her daughter-in-law's cruelty, the life wasted on sacrifices that led to this brutal abandonment. When night began to fall and the first sounds of the woods intensified, Margaret entered the dark house and lay down on an old, damp mattress. For the first time in her life, she seriously thought about giving up on everything. But she had no idea that on the ground she walked on, buried for decades by Robert himself, something was hidden that would change her life forever. Something that would make David deeply regret having abandoned her in that place. The greatest revenge of Margaret's life was literally beneath her feet. 2 weeks passed like an endless nightmare. Margaret had managed to clean only 2 rooms of the house, fighting against dampness, rats, and the constant feeling that she wouldn't survive long in those conditions. The money David had left was almost gone. She ate only 1 meal a day, saving every penny. At night, she would light a candle and stare at old photographs of David as a child, trying to understand where she had gone wrong in raising him. Robert, she would murmur to the yellowed photograph of her husband. Help me. I don't know what to do anymore. It was a rainy Thursday when Margaret went down to the basement of the house for the first time. She was looking for some tool to fix a leak when she tripped on a loose board. When she tried to lift it, she discovered it was hiding a compartment. Inside it, wrapped in thick plastic, was an old notebook and some letters. Margaret's heart raced when she recognized Robert's handwriting. "To my dear Margaret," the first letter said, "if you're reading this, it's because something happened to me and you had to come to the ranch. Forgive me for never telling you, but this place holds a treasure that can change your life." With trembling hands, Margaret continued reading. "My grandfather planted special seedlings on this land over 50 years ago. Rare medicinal herbs that grow naturally here because of the unique soil composition. He taught me about them, but I never had the courage to explore it. The notebook has all the recipes and instructions. Margaret, you can turn this place into a fortune." Margaret leafed through the notebook with growing amazement. Page after page of detailed recipes for ointments, teas, tinctures, and natural remedies, drawings of plants with precise descriptions of where to find them on the property. "St. John's wort for depression grows behind the old house," she read aloud. "Arnica montana for pain on the south slope of the property." The next day, despite the weakness caused by poor nutrition, Margaret went out to explore the property. To her surprise, the plants described in the notebook were everywhere, growing wild. "My God," she murmured, kneeling near a patch of calendula she recognized from the drawings. "This has been here for decades and nobody knew." Following the notebook's instructions, Margaret prepared her first remedy, a healing ointment with calendula and propolis she found in an abandoned beehive behind the property. She tested it herself on a small wound she had gotten clearing brush and was impressed by how quickly it healed. The following week, while going to town to buy basic groceries with her last dollars, Margaret met Mrs. Sebastian, a 70-year-old neighbor who lived 2 miles away. "My dear, are you Robert's widow who came to live at the ranch?" "Yes, Margaret Wilson. Good to meet you, dear. I'm Sebastian. I knew your Robert since he was a boy. He was a very good person. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mrs. Sebastian. How are you managing there alone? That house has been abandoned for so long." "It's difficult," Margaret admitted, "but I'm trying to make it work." Mrs. Sebastian noticed Margaret was limping slightly as they walked. "You hurt your leg, dear?" "Oh, it was just a scratch I got clearing brush. It's almost healed. Be careful with those wounds. I've had one on my leg for 2 months that won't heal. The doctors in town aren't doing anything about it." That's when Margaret remembered the ointment she had prepared. "Mrs. Sebastian, I have a homemade ointment here that I made for my scratch. I can't guarantee anything, but if you'd like to try it." "Homemade ointment? You know about these things?" "My late husband left some family recipes. This one healed my scratch pretty quickly." "Oh dear, for God's sake, it might help." "I've tried everything." Mrs. Sebastian agreed to try it. A week later, she knocked on Margaret's door, euphoric. Margaret, look at my leg." The wound had completely healed. The skin was smooth and pink, with no sign of the inflammation that had persisted for months. "My dear, this is a miracle. How did you make this ointment?" "It's an old recipe with plants from right here on the ranch." "Do you have more?" "My friend also has a skin problem, and Mr. Anthony's son has an irritation that won't get better." Margaret realized she had found something extraordinary, not just a means of survival, but a real purpose. The plants growing naturally on her land had genuine medicinal properties. "Robert," she said that night, looking at her husband's photograph, "thank you for leaving me this treasure. Now I understand why you never wanted to sell this place." What Margaret didn't know yet was that David had made the biggest mistake of his life by abandoning her on that worthless ranch. The news of Mrs. Sebastian's improvement spread through the small rural community like wildfire. In less than a week, Margaret received her first unexpected visit. "Excuse me, are you the Margaret who made the ointment that helped Sebastian?" At the door stood a middle-aged man, carefully holding his right arm. "That's me. And you are?" "Anthony Silva. I live on the neighboring property. My son Junior has a burn on his arm from 3 weeks ago. It happened at the mechanic shop where he works." Margaret invited the man in. The house was still precarious, but at least the 2 main rooms were clean and organized. "Is the burn inflamed?" she asked. "Yes. He's been to the health clinic twice, but it only got worse. Sebastian said you have a special gift." "It's not a gift," Margaret smiled timidly. "They're old recipes my husband kept." Mr. Anthony showed a photo on his cell phone of his son's burn. Margaret immediately recognized the type of injury the notebook described as a second-degree burn with inflammation. "I can prepare a specific ointment for that, but I can't guarantee anything. You understand?" "I understand, Mrs. Wilson, but we've already tried everything." Margaret went to her improvised pharmacy, a table in the kitchen where she kept jars with the herbs she had collected. Following the notebook's recipe, she prepared an ointment with aloe vera, calendula, and wild honey she had found in a hive on the property. Apply it 3 times a day, always after cleaning the wound well, she instructed. If it doesn't improve in 3 days, see a doctor. How much is it, Mrs. Wilson? The question caught Margaret by surprise. She hadn't thought about charging anything. She was just trying to help. Oh, you don't need to pay anything. Mrs. Wilson, you spent time and materials. At least $15. Margaret hesitated, but her last dollars were running out again. If you insist, but only pay if it works. 3 days later, Mr. Anthony returned with his son, Junior. The 20-year-old showed his arm with impressive healing. Mrs. Wilson, look, Junior showed his arm. The inflammation is completely gone. The doctors at the clinic were impressed. How did you do this? Mr. Anthony asked, handing a $20 bill to Margaret. I don't know how to explain it. I just followed the recipe in the notebook. From that day on, visits intensified. Mrs. Conception brought her daughter with eczema. Mr. John asked for tea for joint pain. Mrs. Rose wanted an ointment for varicose veins. Margaret discovered she had a natural intuition for identifying which plant to use for each problem. Robert's notebook was detailed, but she could adapt recipes according to each person's needs. It's like the plants speak to me, she commented to Mrs. Sebastian, who had become her first marketing consultant. They do speak, dear. You have a gift you can't waste. But, Sebastian, I have no education. I'm not a doctor. So what? You're helping people the doctors couldn't help. In 2 weeks, Margaret had attended to 15 people. Most came back to say the remedies had worked and to ask for more products. Some brought friends and relatives. Mrs. Wilson, said Mrs. Conception one morning, have you thought about doing this more professionally? What do you mean? Have your own place, appointment hours, products ready to sell. Margaret had never thought about that. For her, it was still just a way to survive and help neighbors. I wouldn't even know where to start. My friend's daughter works at the city hall. She can guide you on licenses and those bureaucratic things. Licenses to sell natural products, home remedies? There's specific legislation. That night, Margaret counted the money she had collected. $180. It was more than she had earned in months as a saleswoman in the city. But more important than the money was the sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Each person who improved, each smile of gratitude, each thank you so much, Mrs. Wilson, made her feel she had finally found her true calling. Robert, she said to her husband's photograph, I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about turning this place into a fortune. While Margaret planned how to better organize her appointments, a conversation at the city hall was about to accelerate her plans in a way she would never imagine. The following Monday, Margaret was collecting chamomile behind the property when she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. It was rare to receive visits early in the morning, so she was curious. A young, well-dressed woman got out of a white Honda Civic. She looked about 30 and carried an executive briefcase. Good morning. Are you Margaret Wilson? That's me. How can I help you? My name is Patricia Santos. I'm a biologist and I work in the Rural Development Department at City Hall. Mrs. Conception told me about your work here. Margaret got nervous. Was she doing something wrong? Did she need to stop helping people? I'm just helping some neighbors with some home remedies. Mrs. Wilson, you can relax, Patricia smiled. I came here because I was impressed with the reports I heard. Do you have any training in phytotherapy? Phytotherapy? Treatment with medicinal plants. No, miss. I only have the recipes my late husband left. Patricia opened her briefcase and took out some documents. Mrs. Wilson, the City Hall has an incentive program for rural entrepreneurship. We offer microcredit, technical guidance, and help with licensing for small producers. Microcredit? Low-interest loans for people who want to start a business in the countryside. Have you thought about formalizing your activity? Margaret had never thought about formalizing anything. For her, it was just survival. I don't understand those bureaucratic things. That's why I'm here. I can help with all the paperwork. What you need is a business license for rural producer, basic health license, and product registration. Patricia walked around the property, impressed with the variety of medicinal plants growing naturally. Mrs. Wilson, this is a gold mine. You have at least 20 different species of plants with proven therapeutic properties. My husband's notebook mentions over 40 types. Can I see that notebook? Margaret brought Robert's notebook. Patricia flipped through the pages with growing admiration. My God, this is an ethnobotanical treasure. These recipes are decades old, some even centuries old. It's from my husband's family. Mrs. Wilson, with this knowledge and this variety of plants, you can create a real natural products company. A company? Me. Why not? The demand for natural products is growing 20% per year in America. People are tired of synthetic medicines. Patricia explained how it would work. Margaret could request a loan of $15,000 to structure production, create professional packaging, and set up a basic laboratory behind the house. $15,000? But how am I going to pay that back? With product sales, I'll make a projection. If you produce 100 ointments per month and sell them for $10 each, that's already $1,000 in revenue. 100 ointments per month? Mrs. Wilson, you see 15 people per week. Imagine if you had ready-made products with nice packaging, selling in pharmacies in the region. The idea was scary and exciting at the same time. Margaret had never thought so big. What if it doesn't work? What if I can't pay back the loan? The program's success rate is 85%. And look, Patricia showed a list. I already have 5 pharmacies interested in your products. The central pharmacy in town wants to place a test order of 50 units. 50 units? Of the joint pain tea and the healing ointment. The pharmacist heard about the results and wants to test them. Margaret felt a mixture of fear and excitement. It was an opportunity that could completely change her life, but also a huge risk. Patricia, can I think about it a little? Of course, but don't take too long. The program has limited spots and demand is high. When Patricia left, Margaret stood holding the loan documents. $15,000 was more money than she had seen together in her entire life. Robert, she murmured, do I have the courage? That afternoon, Mrs. Sebastian showed up to get more varicose vein ointment. Margaret, you're acting strange. Did something happen? Margaret told her about Patricia's visit and the loan proposal. My dear, this is a blessing. You can't waste this chance. But what if it goes wrong? What if I lose everything? Margaret, you already lost everything when your son brought you here. And look what you've built from nothing. Imagine with $15,000. That night, Margaret made the bravest decision of her life. She would accept the loan and transform her small home operation into a real company. She didn't know that this decision would make David discover in the worst possible way that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 months after signing the loan contract, the transformation of Margaret's ranch was impressive. With Patricia's help, she had built a small laboratory behind the house, installed basic production equipment, and hired 2 neighbors to help with collecting and preparing herbs. Mrs. Wilson, another order arrived, shouted Francisca, one of the employees, running with a paper in her hand. The pharmacy in St. Joseph wants 200 units of digestive tea. Margaret could barely believe the growth. Her brand, Grandma Margaret's Herbs, was becoming known throughout the region. The products came in simple but professional packaging, with labels that Patricia had helped create. Francisca, we're going to need to hire more people. We can't keep up with demand. I already talked to my sister-in-law and Sebastian's friend. They're willing to work. In 6 months, Margaret had paid off half the loan. Her sales grew 30% every month, and she already had 15 different products: teas, ointments, tinctures, and even natural soaps. Mrs. Wilson, said Patricia during a follow-up visit, you need to meet someone. Who? Dr. Henry Morrison. He has a natural products distribution company. He wants to talk about taking your products to pharmacies in other cities. The meeting with Dr. Henry changed everything. He was a 50-year-old, successful man who had built a distribution network for small rural producers. Mrs. Wilson, your products are exceptional. The quality is superior to many national brands I represent. Thank you, doctor. I want to make a proposal. I can distribute your products in 50 pharmacies in the state, but for that we would need to increase production. Increase how? From 200 units per month to 2,000. Margaret was stunned. 2,000, doctor? I don't have the infrastructure for that. That's why I brought this proposal. Dr. Henry opened a folder. My company can finance the expansion of your factory. You build a larger warehouse, hire more employees, and in exchange give me distribution exclusivity for 2 years. How much would this financing be? $100,000. Margaret felt her legs wobble. $100,000 was an astronomical amount for her. Doctor, that's a lot of money. Mrs. Wilson, with the distribution I'm offering, you would gross at least $20,000 per month. In 1 year, you'd have paid off everything and still own an established company. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She was facing the riskiest decision of her life. Accepting meant taking a giant leap, but also assuming enormous responsibility. "Robert," she said to her husband's photograph, "give me strength to decide this." The next day, she took courage and accepted Dr. Henry's proposal. The construction of the new warehouse took months. Margaret hired 12 employees from the region, becoming the largest local employer. The mayor even came to officially inaugurate the Grandma Margaret's Herbs Natural Products Factory. "Mrs. Wilson," said the mayor during the ceremony, "you are an example of entrepreneurship for our city." There were photographers, local authorities, and even a reporter from the regional newspaper. "How do you feel being the woman who generates the most jobs in the rural area?" asked the reporter. "I'm still processing all this," Margaret answered honestly. "A year ago I barely had money to eat. And what are your plans for the future?" "Keep growing, hire more people from the region, and show that it's possible to start over at any age." The article was published on Sunday with a photo of Margaret smiling in front of the warehouse and the headline, "58-year-old widow builds natural products empire and generates 20 jobs in rural area." The news spread quickly on social media in the region. Within hours, hundreds of people were sharing the inspiring story of the widow who had transformed abandonment into success. Among those people was an acquaintance of David's who couldn't resist and sent the article to him via WhatsApp with the message, "Dude, isn't this your mom?" When David opened the photo and read the headline, he felt the world collapse. The woman he had abandoned on a worthless ranch had become the region's most successful businesswoman. David looked at his cell phone screen for the 5th time, unable to believe what he was seeing. The photo showed Margaret smiling in front of a modern warehouse, surrounded by employees. The article's title seemed to mock him. 58-year-old widow builds natural products empire. "Jessica," he shouted, "come see this." Jessica came into the living room drying her hands on a towel, irritated by her husband's tone. "What is it now, David?" "My mom. Look at this." Jessica read the article with wide eyes. "Your mom became a businesswoman? That's not possible. When I left her there, it was nothing but abandoned land." "Wait," Jessica said slowly. "If she's making that much money." David immediately understood what his wife was thinking. His business had plummeted in recent months. The small consulting firm he had opened with money from selling his mother's house was practically bankrupt. "David, you need to talk to her. Your family." "Talk about what?" "I practically threw her out of the house." "That was a year ago. People forget, especially mothers." David knew Jessica wasn't worried about family reconciliation. She saw a financial opportunity. "Jessica, it's not that simple. Simple or not, we're in need. Our bills are late. The credit card is maxed out." It was true. David had invested poorly, made bad choices, and now even the apartment rent was overdue. Ironically, while he was drowning in debt, the mother he had scorned was building an empire. "I'll call her," David decided. "Good. Tell her you missed her, that you want to make peace." David dialed Margaret's old number, but the call didn't go through. He tried again, same result. "The number doesn't exist anymore," he murmured. "Search online. If she became a famous businesswoman, she must have other contacts." David searched and found his mother's company website. There was a business phone number. With his heart racing, he called. "Grandma Margaret's Herbs, good morning," answered a cheerful female voice. "Hi, I'd like to speak with Mrs. Wilson." "Mrs. Wilson is in a meeting. Can I take a message?" "It's personal. I'm David, her son." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "One moment, please." David waited for almost 5 minutes until Margaret answered. "Hello. Mom, how are you?" "David." Margaret's voice was cold, distant. "What do you want?" "Mom, I saw the article in the newspaper. I'm so proud of you." "Proud?" Margaret laughed without humor. "A year ago you said I was too old for anything." "Mom, I was going through a difficult time in my marriage. Jessica was pressuring me. And now she's not pressuring you anymore?" David hesitated. "Mom, I wanted to see you make peace." "David, I'm very busy. I have a company to run." "Mom, just one visit. I want to see what you've built." "Why?" "To evaluate whether it's worth staying in touch with me now that I have money." The coldness in his mother's voice scared David. This wasn't the submissive and affectionate Margaret he knew. "That's not it, Mom. David, when I needed you, you sent me away. Now that I don't need anyone anymore, you want to come back." "Mom, please." "I have to hang up. Good luck with your life." Margaret hung up, leaving David listening to the busy signal. "So what did she say?" Jessica asked anxiously. "She doesn't want to see me." "What do you mean she doesn't want to? You're her son." "Jessica, I destroyed our relationship when I threw her out of the house. Nonsense. Mother is mother. You need to insist. But David knew he had lost much more than a mother when he abandoned her on that ranch. He had lost a woman who loved him unconditionally and who now had every reason in the world to reject him. Meanwhile, the couple's financial situation only got worse. Debts piled up, clients disappeared, and Jessica began showing the same coldness she had shown Margaret. "David, if you don't fix our situation, I'm going to have to think about my future," she said one morning after receiving another overdue bill. David realized he was losing everything: his mother, the money, and now even the wife for whom he had sacrificed his family. The irony was cruel. Margaret, whom he had considered a burden, was prospering, while he, who thought himself so smart, was heading toward complete ruin. 7 months after David's failed call, Margaret was living a reality she never imagined possible. Her company had grown exponentially, and she was about to receive the greatest recognition of her life. "Mrs. Wilson," an important letter arrived. Francisca ran to the office Margaret had set up in the old living room. Margaret opened the official envelope with the Republic's seal. Her hands trembled as she read the header: Department of Commerce, Small Business Administration. "We are honored to inform you that you have been selected to receive the National Rural Entrepreneurship Award in the Women Entrepreneur category." "Francisca," Margaret shouted, "call everyone. Come here." When the 23 employees gathered in the company courtyard, Margaret read the letter aloud. The ceremony would be in Washington, D.C. with the presence of the President of the United States. "Our boss is going to meet the President," shouted Mr. Anthony, who now worked as production supervisor. "And she deserves it," added Mrs. Sebastian, who had become sales manager. "Who deserves it more than her?" The following week, the national press discovered Margaret's story. A team from NBC came to do a special report for their evening news. "Mrs. Wilson," asked the reporter, "how do you feel knowing your story will inspire millions of Americans?" "I still can't believe this is happening to me," Margaret responded emotionally. 2 years ago I was sleeping in a house without electricity, without water, thinking about giving up everything. And what kept you going? The certainty that God doesn't abandon those who work honestly. And anger," she laughed. "Anger? Anger at proving I wasn't useless like some people thought." "Some people?" Margaret hesitated, but decided to be honest. "My own son told me I was too old and sent me away from home. Today my company employs more people than it ever did." The report aired on Sunday night and caused national commotion. Grandma Margaret went viral on social media, and thousands of people shared messages of support and admiration. "Example of overcoming adversity," wrote one user. "Proof that you don't abandon your mother," commented another. "Ungrateful son will regret it," posted a third. David watched the report from the couch of a much smaller apartment than the one he used to live in. Jessica had asked for a separation 2 months earlier, taking half of the few assets that remained. "My God," he murmured, seeing his mother on TV, elegant and confident, being interviewed as a successful national businesswoman. When the reporter asked about family, Margaret was direct. "Today my family is my employees and my community. They welcomed me when I needed it most." "And your son, have you reconciled?" "My son made a choice 2 years ago. I respected it. Now I make my own choices." The coldness in Margaret's voice when speaking about him devastated David. He had lost not just a mother, but the chance to be part of the most inspiring success story he had ever seen. The following Monday, David lost his last client. His consulting firm officially went bankrupt. Without money for rent, he was evicted and had to move to a boarding house room. Ironically, on the same day, Margaret was boarding an executive flight paid for by the federal government to Washington, D.C. The award ceremony was broadcast live on C-SPAN. Margaret, wearing an elegant navy blue suit, walked onto the stage at the White House to receive the award from the president's hands. "Mrs. Margaret Wilson represents what's best in American entrepreneurship," said the president during the presentation. "A woman who transformed rejection into opportunity, abandonment into achievement." "Mr. President," Margaret responded at the microphone, "this award belongs to all the women who were underestimated, scorned, considered too old. It's never too late to show our worth." The speech moved the audience and was reproduced in all the country's newspapers. David watched the ceremony from the boarding house bar, trying to drown his shame in whiskey. When he saw his mother receiving a standing ovation from national authorities, he broke down in tears. "I destroyed everything," he murmured to his empty glass. What David didn't know was that his fall was just beginning, and that very soon he would be forced to face the most humiliating consequences of having abandoned the woman who had become a national icon of resilience. 3 months after receiving the national award, Margaret was in her office reviewing expansion plans when Francisca entered nervously. "Mrs. Wilson, there's a man here wanting to talk to you. Says he's your son." Margaret looked up from the papers. "David is here?" "Yes, ma'am. He looks very different. Seems like he hasn't been taking care of himself." Margaret sighed. She had imagined this day would come. "Send him in." David entered the office like a defeated man. He was thin, with an unkempt beard, wrinkled clothes, and a strong smell of alcohol. He didn't even look like the arrogant executive who had thrown his mother out of the house 2 years earlier. "Hi, Mom." "David." Margaret remained seated without showing emotion. "What do you want?" "Mom, I need help." "What kind of help?" David sat in the chair across from the desk, avoiding his mother's gaze. "I'm broke, homeless. Jessica left me and took everything." "I see. And? Mom, I know I was wrong. I know I was a terrible son, but I'm your blood." "David," Margaret interrupted him coldly. "When you brought me to this ranch, you said I was too old and useless. Remember?" "I remember, and I was wrong. You said I had to manage on my own, that it wasn't your problem anymore." "Mom, please. I have nowhere to go." Margaret observed him without pity. The son who had been so cruel now begged as she had begged 2 years earlier. "David, you have 2 arms, 2 legs, and you're still young. Figure it out." "Mom, I don't know how to do anything. I've never worked with my hands. I didn't know how to make ointments when I got here either. I learned. But Mom, nothing more." Margaret slammed her hand on the desk. "You want help? Then I'll give you the same help you gave me. You can work." "Work where?" "Here. I need someone to carry herb sacks, clean the warehouse, do general services." David was shocked. "You want me to work as a laborer? It's what's available. $800 a month, 1 meal a day, and you can sleep in the tool shed." "Mom, I have a college degree. I ran a company. And I raised you alone for 35 years. Everyone has their resume." Margaret stood up. "Take it or leave it. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. David looked around the luxurious office, with air conditioning, modern computer, shelves of trophies and certificates. All built in the place he had considered an exile. "I accept." "Good. Francisca will explain the rules. Hours are 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening. Unjustified absences result in dismissal." "And David?" "Yes. Here you call me Mrs. Wilson. I'm your boss, not your mother." On the first day of work, David almost quit. Waking up at 5:30 in the morning to carry 100-pound sacks was torture for someone used to an office. His co-workers, former neighbors who knew his story, treated him politely but without intimacy. "Hey, David," said Mr. Anthony during lunch. "It's strange seeing you here, isn't it? I remember when you brought Mrs. Wilson for the first time. She cried a lot those first days." "She cried?" "Oh yes. We'd hear her at night, poor thing. She thought she was going to die here alone." David felt a stab in his chest. He had never imagined the real suffering he had caused his mother. After a week, David tried to approach Margaret again. "Mrs. Wilson, can I talk to you? If it's about work, yes. It's about the past. I wanted to really apologize." Margaret stopped reviewing papers and looked at him coldly. "David, your apologies won't erase the nights I cried from hunger and cold. They won't give back the 2 years I spent not knowing if you were alive or dead." "I know, but—" "There's no but. You had your chance to be my son. You lost it. Now you're just an employee." "Mom, please." "Mrs. Wilson. And if you call me Mom again, you'll be fired." David lowered his head, defeated. The affectionate woman who had raised him had died the day he abandoned her. In her place remained only a successful businesswoman who treated him as he deserved, like a stranger. Margaret's revenge was perfect. It wasn't cruel or violent. It was simply just. David now felt firsthand what it meant to depend on the goodwill of someone who no longer loved him. 5 years passed since David started working as his own mother's employee. Grandma Margaret's Herbs had become an empire with branches in 3 states, 200 employees, and annual revenue in the millions. Margaret, now 63 years old, had become one of the country's most respected rural businesswomen. She received invitations to speak at universities, participated in TV programs, and had written an autobiographical book that became a bestseller. It's never too late to start over. David continued working in the main warehouse, carrying materials and doing general services. In 5 years, he had never missed a single day, desperately trying to prove he had changed, but Margaret maintained the same professional coldness from day one. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson," he greeted every morning. "Good morning, David," she would respond without looking up from her papers. The whole town knew the story, the son who had abandoned his famous mother and now worked for her as an employee. Some felt sorry for David, others thought he deserved the treatment. It was on a Thursday that everything changed. Margaret was in her office when she received a call that left her panicked. "Mrs. Wilson, it's from the hospital. Your employee David collapsed in the warehouse and was brought in as an emergency." Margaret felt her heart race. No matter how cold she tried to be, she still harbored a maternal concern she couldn't completely eliminate. She arrived at the hospital running and found David in the emergency room, connected to machines. The doctor received her with a serious expression. "Ma'am, Mr. David has severe pneumonia. He probably worked sick for days without seeking help. Will he be okay?" "Yes, but he needs absolute rest for at least a month." Margaret approached the gurney where David was sedated. For the first time in 5 years, she looked at him as a human being, not as an employee. She saw the son she had raised thinner, with premature wrinkles caused by hard work and guilt. "Why didn't he tell me he was sick?" she murmured. "Mrs. Wilson," said Francisca, who had accompanied her, "David never complains about anything. He works sick, works in pain, works even when he's unwell. I think he's afraid of being fired." "Afraid of being fired?" "He always says he can't disappoint you again." That night, Margaret lay thinking. David had worked 5 years without a single day off, without a complaint, accepting humiliations in silence. Perhaps it was time to recognize that he had learned his lesson. When David woke up the next day, he found Margaret sitting beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Sorry for collapsing at work, Mrs. Wilson. I promise it won't affect production." "David," Margaret interrupted him gently. "Stop calling me Mrs. Wilson." David's eyes widened. "What? You can call me Mom again." Tears began streaming down David's face. "Mom, you forgave me?" "David, I forgave you a long time ago, but I needed you to understand what you did to me. I needed you to feel firsthand what it's like to depend on someone's kindness." "I understand, Mom. I understood every day of these 5 years. You proved you changed, that you learned the value of work, humility, perseverance." David cried like a child. "Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for being so cruel." "You're forgiven, my son." 2 years later, David had become general manager of the company, not for being the owner's son, but for having proven he deserved the position. Margaret had created an institute for mothers abandoned by their children, offering professional training and emotional support. "Mom," David said one morning, "I want you to know I'm grateful for everything you taught me." "What did I teach you?" "That no one is disposable, that every person has value, that true love sometimes needs to be firm to educate." "And what else?" David smiled. "That you should never underestimate a rejected mother." Margaret had built more than a business empire. She had built a legacy of dignity, resilience, and forgiveness. She had proven that a 58-year-old woman, considered too old, still had much to offer the world. Her greatest revenge wasn't coldness or humiliation. It was transforming her ungrateful son into a worthy man and showing the world that maternal love, when tempered with justice, can move mountains. "Robert," she said that night, looking at her husband's photograph in her new house, "we did it. Our son learned what really matters in life." Margaret Wilson's story had become legend, living proof that it's never too late to start over and that a determined mother can transform rejection into the greatest empire of all, the empire of love earned with dignity.